The silence stretched across Kandahar airfield like a held breath. Colonel Marcus Thorne adjusted his aviators against the Afghan sun, watching the figure emerge from the C-130's cargo bay. Desert fatigues, regulation boots, regulation everything, except for the way she carried herself. There was something in her stride that made seasoned operators pause mid-conversation, something that whispered of secrets buried in classified folders. "That's our mystery pilot," Captain Rodriguez squinted through the heat shimmer. "Command wouldn't tell us jack about her background, just said she'd be leading the Osprey insertion tomorrow." Thorne grunted, studying the woman as she shouldered her gear. Average height, auburn hair pulled into a tight bun, face that belonged in small-town America rather than the world's most dangerous airspace. She looked like she'd be more comfortable flying tourists over the Grand Canyon than threading the needle through Taliban-controlled valleys. "Aurora Voss," the colonel read from his tablet, scrolling through what little information they'd been given. "Call sign Phantom, that's it. Everything else is redacted." The mystery deepened as Phantom approached the operations tent. She moved with the fluid economy of someone who'd learned to conserve energy in hostile environments, her pale green eyes constantly scanning, cataloging, calculating. But there was something else, something that made Thorne's gut tighten with unease. It was the way she looked at the sky. Most pilots glanced up with love, with longing, with the eternal romance of flight. Phantom looked up like she was checking the locks on a door she'd rather keep closed, like the blue expanse above held memories she'd prefer to forget. "Ma'am," Thorne extended his hand as she reached the command post. "Colonel Thorne, 3rd Aviation Regiment. Welcome to paradise." Her handshake was firm but brief. "Colonel." Her voice carried traces of Montana, maybe Wyoming, somewhere with big skis and bigger distances. "I assume you've reviewed tomorrow's mission parameters." "About that," Thorne's tone shifted. "This ain't your range, girl." The words came out with practiced condescension, the kind reserved for pilots who looked too clean, too untested. "We're talking about a 40-minute flight through the nastiest airspace in theater. Taliban's got stingers and they know how to use them. Maybe you should observe this one, get your feet wet gradually." Phantom's expression didn't change. She simply nodded toward the weapons rack where her personal rifle rested among the standard-issue M4s. The afternoon light caught the stock, illuminating a series of small notches carved into the dark wood with surgical precision. Thorne squinted, counting. His confident smirk faltered somewhere around 60. By 90, his face had gone pale beneath his tan. 99 kill marks, each one carved with the meticulous care of someone who understood that every mark represented a life taken, a choice made, a moment when death had looked her in the eye and blinked first. The colonel's chuckle died in his throat. The camp's background noise, helicopters spooling up, soldiers shouting coordinates, the distant rumble of convoy engines, seemed to fade as every person within eyeshot began to notice what Thorne was staring at. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Radio chatter became white noise. Phantom Voss stood motionless in the center of it all, watching their faces change as understanding dawned. She'd seen this moment countless times before, the instant when assumptions crumbled and reality reasserted itself with brutal clarity. The moment when girl became operator, when prejudice transformed into something approaching respect, or at least fear. "The mission brief is at 600, she said quietly, her voice carrying easily across the sudden stillness. "I'll need weather updates every 15 minutes starting at 400, and I want to speak with whoever's been monitoring Taliban communications in grid squares 79 through 712. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled faces, some curious, some skeptical, all recalculating their first impressions. "And Colonel," Phantom's pale eyes fixed on Thorne, "I've been wet since before you pinned on your oak leaves. Tomorrow we'll see how well you keep up." The operations tent erupted into controlled chaos as officers scrambled to accommodate what they were beginning to understand was not a request, but a series of commands from someone who'd clearly earned the right to give them. Maps unfurled across folding tables, radios crackled to life with urgent queries, and the machinery of military precision began turning in response to Phantom's presence. Staff Sergeant Kowalski, a grizzled crew chief with 20 years of rotary wing experience, approached the rifle rack with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. He counted the marks again, slower this time, his lips moving silently with each tally. "Jesus Christ," he whispered to his colleague Airman Barnes. 99 confirmed kills, that's sniper-level numbers. Barnes, barely 22 and fresh from technical school, stared at the rifle with wide eyes. "But she's a pilot, right? How does a pilot rack up numbers like that?" "Kid," Kowalski's voice carried the weight of experience, "there's only one way a pilot gets that many notches without being on the ground. And if I'm right about what I think I'm looking at, we're about to fly with a goddamn legend." The mystery of Aurora, Phantom, Voss was beginning to unfold, one whispered conversation at a time, one nervous glance at a time, one recalculated assumption at a time. But the real questions: who was she, where had she come from, and what had forged her into the operator who could stand perfectly still while 99 ghosts danced in the shadows of her past? Those answers would have to wait for the darkness to come calling. The mission brief at 600 would be unlike anything Kandahar had seen, because Aurora Voss, call sign Phantom, was about to remind everyone present that the deadliest threats often came wrapped in the most unassuming packages, and that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room was the one nobody expected to be there. Night fell over Kandahar like a curtain dropping on the day's drama, but sleep eluded most of the base personnel. Word had spread through the camp's informal networks, the kind of intelligence that traveled faster than official communications and carried more weight than written orders. Phantom Voss wasn't just another pilot rotating through theater. She was something else entirely. Major Elena Vasquez, the base's senior intelligence officer, sat hunched over her laptop in the dim glow of the communications tent, her fingers dancing across classified databases with increasing urgency. Every search for Aurora Voss returned the same frustrating result: access denied, file classified, information restricted to need-to-know basis. "What the hell?" she muttered, trying another approach. The woman had to have left some kind of paper trail. Pilots didn't just materialize out of thin air with 99 confirmed kills and a call sign that made hardened operators nervous. 3/10 over, Phantom herself sat cross-legged on her cot, field stripping her sidearm with the mechanical precision of someone who performed the ritual thousands of times. Her movements were economical, practiced, almost meditative. Each component was inspected, cleaned, and reassembled with the kind of care that spoke to survival instincts honed by experiences most soldiers never faced. The Beretta M9 was standard issue, but like everything else about Aurora Voss, closer inspection revealed modifications that weren't regulation. The trigger had been professionally adjusted, the sights replaced with military-grade night optics, and the grip had been textured for better control in adverse conditions. This wasn't a pilot's backup weapon, it was a warrior's primary tool. As she worked, fragments of conversations drifted through the canvas walls. Soldiers speculating about her background, mechanics wondering what kind of bird she'd flown to rack up those numbers, officers debating whether to adjust tomorrow's mission parameters to account for their mysterious new asset. "I heard she flew Black Ops in Syria," someone whispered in the darkness. "Bullshit, look at her age. She can't be more than 35, not enough time to accumulate that kind of history. Unless she started young, really young." The conversations continued, theories multiplying with each retelling, but Phantom remained focused on her weapon maintenance. She'd learned long ago that speculation about her past was unavoidable. Better to let them wonder than to provide answers that would only generate more questions. At 300, she completed her pre-mission routine with the same methodical approach she applied to everything else. Equipment check, communications test, weather brief, intelligence update. By the time most of the base began stirring for the morning watch change, Aurora Voss had been awake for hours, preparing for a mission that would either cement her reputation or add one final entry to a career built in shadows. The question hanging over Kandahar wasn't whether Phantom could handle the insertion flight through hostile airspace. Looking at those 99 notches carved into her rifle stock, it was becoming clear that the real question was what kind of hell she'd already walked through to earn each one of them, and whether tomorrow's mission would finally provide the 100th. Colonel Thorne found himself staring at the ceiling of his quarters at 4:30, unable to shake the image of those kill marks. In 30 years of military service, he'd never encountered a pilot with numbers like that. Combat helicopter crews might see significant action, but 99 confirmed kills suggested something far beyond routine air-to-ground missions. He'd made calls, pulled strings, leveraged every contact in his network to get some background on Aurora Voss. The responses had been uniform, classified beyond his clearance level, restricted access, no comment authorized. Even his contacts at Pentagon had gone silent when he mentioned her name. The colonel rolled out of his bunk and pulled on his uniform, mind racing through possibilities. Special Operations Aviation Regiment. Possibly, but their pilots rarely operated with that level of individual accountability. CIA paramilitary operations. Maybe, but the timeline didn't fit. Foreign exchange program. Mercenary work. Each theory raised more questions than it answered. What bothered him most wasn't the mystery. It was the way she'd looked at the sky. He'd seen that expression before, in the eyes of pilots who'd survived situations that should have killed them. Combat veterans who'd learned that the blue expanse above could transform from sanctuary to battleground in the span of a heartbeat. As Thorne made his way toward the operations tent through the pre-dawn darkness, he passed the maintenance bay where Chief Kowalski was already preparing the MV-22 Osprey for the day's mission. The massive tiltrotor aircraft sat like a mechanical predator in the hangar's shadows, its twin engines and rotors embodying the cutting-edge technology that allowed it to take off like a helicopter and fly like an airplane. "Chief," Thorne approached the maintenance station. "How's she looking?" Kowalski glanced up from his checklist, grease-stained hands never pausing in their work. "Bird's solid, sir, but I've been thinking about our pilot situation." "Yeah." I pulled some maintenance records from other bases, unofficial-like, cross-referenced aircraft tail numbers with pilot assignments. The chief's expression was thoughtful, almost troubled. "Found something interesting. Every bird Phantom's flown in the last 5 years has come back with combat damage. Not flight line accidents, not weather-related wear. Battle damage." Thorne felt his stomach tighten. "What kind of damage?" "Bullet holes, shrapnel scoring, hydraulic line repairs consistent with ground fire exposure. One Apache came back with so many hits the airframe was written off as total loss." Kowalski set down his wrench and looked directly at the colonel. "Sir, in my 20 years of maintaining combat aircraft, I've never seen a pattern like this. Most pilots go their entire careers without taking serious hits. This woman's been flying through hell on a regular basis." The implications hit Thorne like a physical blow. 99 confirmed kills, aircraft consistently returning with battle damage, a background so classified that even colonels couldn't access it. Aurora Voss wasn't just an experienced pilot. She was a weapon system wrapped in human skin, a specialist in situations where survival meant killing everything that moved and flying out through walls of enemy fire. As the eastern sky began showing the first hints of dawn, the pieces of a terrible puzzle were beginning to align. Tomorrow's mission through Taliban-controlled airspace wouldn't be a test of Phantom's abilities. It would be another day at the office for someone who'd already proven she could navigate the space between life and death with surgical precision. The morning briefing was scheduled to begin in 90 minutes, But Thorne already knew that everything they thought they understood about their mysterious pilot was about to change. The question wasn't whether Aurora Voss could complete the mission. The question was what kind of carnage she'd leave in her wake while doing it. The operations tent had transformed overnight into a nerve center of controlled urgency. Maps covered every available surface, marked with colored pins indicating friendly positions, known enemy concentrations, and the serpentine flight path that would carry 12 Special Forces operators deep into the Kunar province's most contested territory. Aurora Voss arrived at exactly 600, her flight suit bearing no decorations beyond name tape and wings. She moved through the assembled officers and NCOs like water flowing around stones, acknowledging nods with slight inclinations of her head, but offering no conversation. Her pale eyes swept across the tactical displays with the systematic precision of someone reading a familiar language written in topographical lines and threat assessments. "Gentlemen," Colonel Thorne called the briefing to order, his voice carrying across the tent's hushed conversations. "Lady, today's mission is Operation Ghostwalk, insertion of ODA 3126 into Grid Square 711 for a 72-hour reconnaissance and target identification mission." The briefing proceeded according to military protocol: weather conditions, enemy activity reports, communications procedures, extraction contingencies. Standard operating procedure for what should have been a routine special operations flight, except for the growing tension that seemed to emanate from their pilot like heat from an engine. Phantom stood perfectly still throughout the presentation, her attention focused on details that others might overlook: radio frequencies, backup landing zones, the precise timing of AC-130 gunship coverage windows. She absorbed information with the intensity of someone for whom small details meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. "Questions?" Thorne concluded, scanning the assembled faces. "Weather window," Phantom's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Meteorology shows possible thunderstorm development between 1400 and 1600 hours. If we encounter delays on target, extraction could be compromised." Major Richards, the ODA team leader, nodded approvingly. "Good catch. What do you recommend?" "We accelerate the timeline. Wheels up in 30 minutes instead of 60, accept increased risk during insertion to maintain extraction options." She paused, her gaze shifting to encompass the entire room. "The alternative is potentially leaving your people on the ground overnight in hostile territory." The casual way she referred to abandoning soldiers revealed everything the assembled officers needed to know about Aurora Voss's operational experience. She wasn't speaking theoretically. She was drawing from a reservoir of hard-earned knowledge about what happened when missions went sideways and extraction windows closed. "Approved," Thorne decided immediately. "Chief Kowalski, how fast can you have the bird ready?" "She's ready now, sir. Just need to load personnel and equipment." As the briefing dissolved into the organized chaos of mission preparation, Phantom remained at the tactical display, studying the flight path with an intensity that made several officers uncomfortable. Her finger traced the route through the Kunar Valley, pausing at specific waypoints that appeared unremarkable to casual observation. "Problem areas," Major Richards approached, following her gaze. "Choke points," she replied without looking up. "Here, here, and here." Her finger tapped 3 locations where the valley narrowed, forcing the Osprey into predictable flight paths. "If I were setting up an ambush, those are where I'd position my teams." Richard studied the map more carefully, beginning to understand why this particular pilot had been selected for the mission. She wasn't just planning to fly through hostile airspace. She was thinking like the enemy, anticipating threats, preparing countermeasures for scenarios that hadn't yet materialized. "How do we mitigate?" "Variable altitude, irregular timing, unpredictable approach angles." Phantom's voice carried the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing routine procedures rather than life-or-death tactical decisions. And we stay ready to fight our way out. The implications of that final statement hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Fighting their way out meant enemy contact, weapons engagement, the kind of close-quarters combat that transformed routine insertions into desperate struggles for survival. As the Special Forces team finished their final equipment checks and filed toward the flight line, Aurora Voss collected her gear with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else. Helmet, flight vest, sidearm, and the mysterious rifle that had started this entire puzzle. Each item was inspected, adjusted, and secured according to protocols that seemed both military standard and uniquely personal. The Osprey waited in the morning sun like a mechanical chrysalis ready to transform from ground vehicle to aircraft at the pilot's command. Its rotors hung motionless in the still air, but there was potential energy in every line of its design, promise of the controlled violence that would lift it into Afghanistan's unforgiving sky. Chief Kowalski performed his final walk-around inspection, checking control surfaces, engine intakes, and landing gear with the thoroughness of someone whose reputation depended on bringing aircraft and crews home alive. As Phantom approached the crew entrance, he caught her attention with a gesture. "Ma'am," his voice carried the respectful tone reserved for operators who'd proven themselves under fire. "I don't know what kind of hell you've flown through before, but I want you to know this bird's solid. She'll get you there and back." Phantom paused in her pre-flight preparations, considering the chief's words. "Chief, in my experience, the aircraft always performs. It's the terrain that tries to kill you." She climbed aboard the Osprey without another word, leaving Kowalski staring after her with the growing understanding that Aurora Voss had survived situations that would have destroyed lesser pilots. The question wasn't whether she could handle today's mission. It was what she'd learned in the process of earning those 99 kill marks, and whether Kandahar was ready to discover what kind of warrior they'd invited into their midst. The engine spooled up with a sound like controlled thunder, and Operation Ghostwalk began its transformation from briefing room theory to battlefield reality. The Osprey's engines wound up to full power with a sound that penetrated bone and sinew, vibrating through the aircraft's frame like the heartbeat of a mechanical god. Aurora Voss ran through her pre-flight checklist with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed, each switch activation and system verification flowing seamlessly into the next. In the passenger compartment, 12 Special Forces operators sat in the red-lit dimness, their faces hidden behind night vision goggles and tactical masks. These were professionals who'd earned their places through years of training and combat experience, but even hardened warriors could feel nervous energy building as the mission transitioned from planning to execution. Kandahar Tower, Ghostwalk 01 requesting clearance for departure. Phantom's voice carried over the intercom with the calm professionalism that marked experienced aviators. Flight of 1, MV-22, proceeding direct to Waypoint Alpha. Ghostwalk 01, Kandahar Tower. Cleared for departure, winds calm, visibility unlimited. Be advised, we show scattered enemy radio traffic in your operating area. Roger Tower, Ghostwalk 01 lifting. The massive tiltrotor aircraft rose from the tarmac with surprising grace, its rotors biting into the thin mountain air and translating collective pitch inputs into vertical momentum. At 200 feet, Phantom initiated the conversion sequence, tilting the engine nacelles forward as the Osprey transformed from helicopter to airplane, trading the inefficiency of hover flight for the speed and range that would carry them deep into Indian country. Below them, Kandahar Airfield dwindled to a collection of geometric shapes scattered across the desert floor, but Aurora's attention was already focused ahead, on the jagged mountains that rose like broken teeth along Afghanistan's eastern border. The Kunar province waited beyond those peaks, a landscape so hostile that even seasoned operators referred to it in whispers. 30 minutes to Waypoint Alpha, she announced over the intercom. Weather's holding, but I'm picking up radio chatter on Taliban frequencies. They know something's moving. Major Richards, the ODA team leader, leaned forward in his seat. How much do they know? Not specifics, but they're coordinating. Multiple stations, disciplined communications procedures. Phantom's voice carried the analytical tone of someone who'd learned to extract intelligence from enemy communications. Someone down there knows how to run an operation. The implication hung in the cabin like smoke from a battlefield fire. Professional opposition meant prepared ambushes, coordinated attacks, the kind of tactical sophistication that transformed routine missions into desperate struggles for survival. It meant the enemy wasn't just waiting, they were planning. 23 minutes later, the Hindu Kush Mountains filled the windscreen like a wall of stone and shadow. The Osprey threaded between peaks at altitudes that made breathing difficult and navigation challenging, following valleys carved by ancient glaciers into corridors barely wide enough for the aircraft's 90-foot wingspan. Waypoint Alpha, Phantom announced, her hand steady on the controls as she banked the Osprey into a valley so narrow that rock faces passed within feet of the wingtips. Entering hostile airspace, everyone stays alert. The transformation in the cabin was immediate and palpable. 12 professional soldiers shifted from travel mode to combat readiness, weapons coming to condition 1, night vision devices adjusting to the changing light conditions, communication checks confirming that every man could reach every other man when the shooting started. Aurora Voss flew the Osprey through the valley system like a surgeon wielding a scalpel, making course corrections with minute control inputs that kept them away from predictable flight path while maintaining the precise timing necessary for mission success. Her eyes constantly scanned the terrain below, looking for the subtle signs that marked enemy positions, vehicle tracks, camouflaged installations, the glint of metal in morning sunlight. Movement 2 o'clock, she reported calmly. Looks like personnel near that ridgeline. Richards pressed his face against the cabin window, scanning the rocky slopes through binoculars. I see them. 4, maybe 5 individuals. No visible weapons. Weapons are there, Phantom replied with absolute certainty. They're just hidden, classic Overwatch position. The confidence in her voice made Richards look at the terrain with new eyes. The position she'd identified commanded excellent fields of fire over the valley floor, offered multiple escape routes, and provided concealment from aerial observation. It was exactly where he would position his own people if the roles were reversed. How do you know? Because that's where I would be, she answered simply. And because those aren't shepherds. Shepherds don't maintain communications discipline. Her radio headset crackled with intercepted Taliban communications, rapid-fire Pashto phrases that spoke of coordination and timing. Aurora's understanding of the language wasn't perfect, but her operational experience filled in the gaps. The enemy knew they were coming, knew roughly when they'd arrive, and was moving pieces into position for what promised to be a carefully orchestrated reception. 30 seconds to insertion point, she announced, beginning the approach sequence that would put the Special Forces team on the ground in the heart of Taliban territory. LZ looks clear, but I'm not liking the radio traffic. The Osprey descended toward a small plateau surrounded by steep ridgelines, its rotors transitioning back to helicopter configuration, as Aurora prepared for the precision landing that would deliver ODA 3126 to their objective. Below them, the landing zone appeared empty, but appearances could be deceptive in a landscape where camouflage was an art form, and every shadow might conceal a weapon. 10 seconds, Phantom called out, her voice steady despite the growing certainty that they were flying into a trap. Be ready to move fast. The 12 Special Forces operators prepared to exit the aircraft with the coordinated precision of a unit that had trained together for years. Weapons ready, equipment secured, minds focused on the 72 hours of reconnaissance and target identification that lay ahead. But first, they had to survive the next 60 seconds. The Osprey's wheels touched the rocky ground with barely perceptible impact, and Aurora Voss proved once again why she carried 99 notches on her rifle stock. Because surviving in places like this required more than just flying skills. It required the kind of warrior instinct that could smell an ambush before the first shot was fired. The moment the Osprey's wheels kissed the rocky plateau, Aurora's threat assessment crystallized into deadly certainty. The landing zone was too quiet, the surrounding ridgelines too empty, the radio silence too complete. In her experience, real emptiness had a different quality than manufactured emptiness, and this felt manufactured. "Go, go, go," Major Richards barked, and 12 Special Forces operators flowed out of the aircraft like water from a burst dam, fanning into defensive positions with the fluid precision of a unit that had rehearsed this moment countless times. They moved low and fast, seeking cover among the scattered boulders that dotted the plateau's surface. Aurora kept the engines spooled up, rotors turning, ready for immediate departure if the situation deteriorated. Her eyes swept the surrounding terrain through the cockpit glass, cataloging potential threat positions, escape routes, and the subtle signs that marked the difference between natural landscape and carefully prepared killing ground. The silence stretched for 30 seconds, 60, 90. Ghostwalk 01, Anvil 6, Richard's voice crackled through the radio. LZ secure, we're moving to phase line Alpha. Roger, Anvil 6. I'll maintain orbit until you're clear of the immediate area. Aurora began the takeoff sequence, lifting the Osprey away from the plateau and into the relative safety of altitude. But safety was a relative concept in airspace where shoulder-fired missiles could reach 20,000 feet and enemy fighters knew how to use terrain for concealment. As the Special Forces team disappeared into the broken terrain below, moving toward their reconnaissance objectives with the careful stealth that kept operators alive, Aurora established a racetrack pattern above the valley. The mission called for her to return to base and wait for the extraction call, but something in the radio intercepts she'd been monitoring suggested that might not be an option. The Taliban communications had shifted from coordination to execution phase, short, clipped phrases that spoke of movement and timing. Professional terminology that indicated far more sophisticated opposition than the intelligence briefings had suggested. Someone down there was running a complex operation, and the insertion of ODA 3126 had triggered a response that went far beyond routine harassment. Kandahar Base, Ghostwalk 01, she transmitted on the encrypted frequency. Insertion complete, but I'm monitoring coordinated enemy communications. Recommend you prep a backup extraction plan. Ghostwalk 01, Kandahar Base. Copy your assessment. Can you provide specifics on enemy activity? Aurora processed the radio intercepts she'd been collecting, her understanding of Pashto supplemented by years of operational experience that taught her to read the spaces between words. Multiple units converging on the area, disciplined communications, references to the Americans and timing coordinates. Someone's been watching us. The implications were stark and immediate. The mission had been compromised before it began, either through intelligence leaks or sophisticated surveillance that allowed the enemy to predict American operational patterns. ODA 3126 wasn't walking into a reconnaissance mission. They were walking into a carefully prepared trap. Kandahar Base, Ghostwalk 01. I'm remaining on station pending further developments. Negative, Ghostwalk 01. Return to base as planned. Extraction is scheduled for 72 hours from insertion. Aurora stared down at the maze of valleys and ridgelines that concealed 12 American soldiers and an unknown number of enemy fighters. Military protocol demanded that she follow orders and return to base, but operational experience whispered that leaving the area would be signing death warrants for men, she just delivered into harm's way. The decision crystallized in her mind with the clarity that came from years of making choices between following orders and keeping people alive. Kandahar Base, Ghostwalk 01. I'm experiencing minor mechanical issues that require me to remain in the area for troubleshooting. It was a lie, but it was the kind of lie that kept soldiers breathing when bureaucratic procedures would get them killed. Aurora had learned long ago that sometimes the most important orders were the ones you chose not to follow. 40 minutes after the insertion, the first shots echoed across the valley like thunder rolling between the peaks. Distant pops of small arms fire, the distinctive crack of AK-47s, and the sharper reports of American weapons returning fire. The battle for survival had begun, and 12 Special Forces operators were fighting for their lives against odds that sounded worse with every radio transmission. Anvil 6 Ghostwalk 01, Aurora transmitted immediately. I have your gunfire. What's your status? Ghostwalk 01, we're in contact. Multiple enemy positions taking fire from 3 directions. We need close air support now. Aurora checked her fuel gauges and weapon systems. The Osprey carried limited armament, door guns, and whatever personal weapons the crew brought aboard. Against entrenched enemy positions, it would be like fighting a forest fire with a garden hose. But sometimes, a garden hose was all you had, and Aurora Voss had learned to make the most of whatever tools were available. Anvil 6, Ghostwalk 01. I'm coming back around. Mark your positions with IR strobes and keep your heads down. She banked the Osprey into a diving turn that would bring her over the contact area at low altitude, trading safety for the kind of close support that might give the Special Forces team a chance to break contact and escape. It was the kind of decision that separated pilots from warriors, the moment when flying skills became secondary to the willingness to enter harm's way for brothers in arms. The radio crackled with desperate communications as ODA 3126 fought for their lives in the shadow of the Hindu Kush, and Aurora Voss prepared to add another chapter to the legend that had already earned her 99 notches on a rifle stock. The Osprey screamed down the valley at an altitude that made seasoned pilots queasy, its rotors barely clearing the rocky outcroppings that lined both sides of the narrow gorge. Aurora held the aircraft steady through turbulence that would have challenged a fixed-wing fighter, her hands working the controls with the kind of precision that came from flying through hell more times than anyone cared to count. Anvil 6, Ghostwalk 01, she transmitted, her voice steady despite the growing intensity of gunfire echoing through the mountains. I have visual on your IR strobes. Enemy positions are approximately 100 meters north of your location, dug in along the ridgeline. Roger, Ghostwalk 01. We count at least 20 hostiles in prepared positions. They've got us pinned down pretty good. Aurora could see the tactical situation unfolding below like a three-dimensional chess game played with bullets and blood. The Special Forces team had taken cover in a cluster of boulders near the valley floor, but their position offered limited concealment and no escape routes. Enemy fighters occupied the high ground in a textbook L-shaped ambush, with interlocking fields of fire that covered every avenue of retreat. It was the kind of tactical nightmare that killed entire units when conventional responses failed to break the enemy's advantage. But Aurora Voss had never been accused of conventional thinking. Anvil 6, I'm going to make a gun run on the north ridgeline. When you see my tracers, shift fire to the eastern positions and prepare to move. Ghostwalk 01, you're not equipped for close air support. That's not what Ospreys are designed for. Aurora's laugh carried over the radio with the sound of someone who'd heard similar objections countless times before. Major, I've been modifying mission parameters since before you graduated from the point. Trust me on this one. She pulled the Osprey into a climb that brought them above the ridgeline where enemy muzzle flashes were winking like deadly stars in the morning shadows. The aircraft's door gunner, Sergeant First Class Williams, had already positioned his M240 machine gun for optimal fields of fire, but the mounting system limited his engagement angles. "Williams," Aurora called over the intercom, "I'm going to give you a firing solution that's not in any manual. You ready?" "Ma'am, I've been ready since we left Kandahar." Aurora rolled the Osprey into a banking turn that would have been impossible for most aircraft, using the tiltrotor's unique flight characteristics to present the door gun with a clear line of sight to the enemy positions. The maneuver violated every safety protocol for combat aviation, but it worked. Williams opened fire with the mechanical precision of a master craftsman, his tracers stitching across the ridgeline in precise bursts that found their targets with devastating accuracy. The heavy machine gun rounds tore through enemy positions like a chainsaw through timber, suppressing return fire and creating the tactical opening that ODA 3126 needed to reposition. "Moving," Richards called out, and Aurora could see the Special Forces team flowing across the valley floor in tactical bounds, using suppressive fire and terrain features to break contact with their pursuers. But the enemy commander was no amateur. As soon as ODA 3126 began their withdrawal, reserve positions opened fire from previously silent locations, catching the Americans in a secondary kill zone that had been prepared for exactly this contingency. "Contact rear," someone screamed over the radio, and Aurora could see muzzle flashes erupting from positions that hadn't shown any activity during her initial reconnaissance. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. ODA 3126 was caught between multiple enemy positions, taking casualties, running low on ammunition, and facing the kind of coordinated opposition that suggested careful planning and extensive preparation. Aurora keyed her radio with the calm voice of someone who'd faced impossible odds before and found ways to make them possible. "Anvil 6, Ghostwalk 01. I'm going to try something unconventional. When I give the word, pop smoke and run directly toward my aircraft." "Say again, Ghostwalk 01. Run toward your aircraft." "Affirmative. I'm going to set down in the middle of the contact area and extract you under fire. It's insane, but it's also the last thing they'll expect." The radio silence that followed spoke volumes about the kind of desperation that made insane plans look reasonable. ODA 3126 was running out of options, and Aurora Voss was offering them the kind of solution that either saved lives or killed everyone involved. "Ghostwalk 01, Anvil 6.